And I would like to say a special thanks to Dan Collison, Director of Partnerships, for the collaboration. We are very excited to have you here with us today. The context for this webinar is the monumental change that the City of Minneapolis made earlier this spring to lower speed limits. We know that lower traffic speeds reduce the likelihood of a crash and make all types of crashes less likely to lead to death or life-changing injuries. Today, we're going to learn from Vision Zero Program Coordinator, Ethan Fawley, on how this fits in with the long-term vision of the City of Minneapolis through the Transportation Action Plan. I'm excited to have our webinar attendees come away with an understanding of how this will improve commuting options and safety for the thousands of downtown workers who traverse our roads on a daily basis. So let's start off with a few housekeeping items. You have all been placed on mute. Please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. And last but not least, today's webinar, I should say, will be recorded, and we'll make this available later on our website. I am so thrilled today to share with you our new website. This is a screenshot, moveminneapolis.org. We are an organization that makes sustainable transportation easy. We're a nonprofit transportation management organization. We offer free commute management consulting to employers and building owners. And we promote sustainable commuting throughout the metro region by offering multimodal events, programming, and messaging efforts, including the Downtown Transportation Summit, which, mark your calendars, will be on May 21st at 11 a.m. You can find out more information on our website. We also host Car Free MSP, and our tagline, Move Like a Boss. We also collaborate with local transportation leaders, including the City of Minneapolis, which brings us to today's webinar. And I would like to say thank you one more time to the Downtown Council for your partnership on this webinar. So, to the guest of honor today, I'm very pleased to have Ethan Fawley from the City of Minneapolis in the house virtually. Ethan leads Vision Zero efforts within the City of Minneapolis. He is also the design topic lead on the city's Transportation Action Plan, which is out in draft form. We'll start our program out with an approximately 30-minute presentation from Ethan and then time for Q&A. You can either put your question in the chat or the Q&A box. Okay, we're ready to go. I'm going to turn it over to you, Ethan.
All right, hi everyone. Hopefully you can start to see me. I'm going to share my screen here. Sorry, I had a slight technical difficulty at the crucial moment. Somehow at times this happens. All right.
No problem, Ethan.
Okay, there we go. So I'm going to just jump right in. I think the important context for our speed limit change, which I'll get to in just a minute here in the City of Minneapolis, is our Vision Zero initiative. So Minneapolis Vision Zero is the city's goal to eliminate traffic deaths and severe injuries on city streets by 2027. To give you some context for the work that we have to do to reach that goal, in the last 4 years, an average of 13 people have died and 128 people have been severely injured in crashes on streets in Minneapolis. With Vision Zero, we say that that's unacceptable and we can do something about it. So I mentioned some numbers there. I'm gonna mention some more numbers throughout this presentation. I think it's important to recognize that those are people and families whose lives are forever changed. This graphic shows the first names of people who were killed in traffic crashes in 2018 in Minneapolis. These included people who work downtown, people who live downtown and throughout the city, and people from all walks of life, ages, backgrounds. And this is a challenge and a problem that affects all of us in a very personal way. And when it does, it's life-changing, and that's what we want to avoid. I want to note that Vision Zero overall, we take a multidisciplinary approach. I'm going to talk about that a little bit with the context around speed limits too in a minute. But this includes a number of different city departments. I am based in the Public Works Department, but that's just one component of Vision Zero. And then we're working in partnership with many other entities, including Hennepin County, MnDOT, and who have similar sorts of initiatives around making our streets safe for everyone. I'm gonna, Becky alluded to the Transportation Action Plan as well, and so I wanna give that a quick plug. It's connected to the Vision Zero work, and the speed limits are kind of in the context of the Transportation Action Plan as well. So this is the city's 10-year transportation plan. It's currently out in draft form for just over another week here. And so I would really encourage you to check it out. There's a lot of things that will be of interest to downtown stakeholders. We are accepting comment through May 22nd. We do have a daytime final online open house for the Transportation Action Plan this Thursday, as you can see it at 11 a.m. For that, we'll give a brief or about a half-hour presentation kind of overviewing the Transportation Action Plan, some of the key components to it, and then we will take questions for about an hour. And so if you want to kind of get a preview before you provide comments, this is a really good opportunity. You can see our website is go.minneapolismn.gov for the Transportation Action Plan. So a few more things around safety in the context for our speed limit change. So when we compare Minneapolis to other cities and around the country, so nationally we do pretty well. If you were to just focus on, say, the 25 or so large Vision Zero cities, so cities that have committed to getting to zero traffic deaths, we are about 5th in that. So we trail only cities like New York, which is on here, which may be surprising to a lot of folks that, how is it safer in New York than it is in Minneapolis? And really that's because when they started their Vision Zero initiative, which is about 4 or 5 years before Minneapolis, they were less safe than Minneapolis, but they've made progress almost every year since then. And actually in 2018, they had a little uptick last year, but 2018, they had their lowest number of traffic fatalities since they started recording them in 1912. And so we want to have similar results here in Minneapolis, get back to being safer than New York, but also look to the inspiration of cities like Oslo, Norway, or Stockholm, Sweden, which both had 0 pedestrian or bicycle fatalities last year. Oslo had 1 total traffic fatality. It's a city about twice as large as Minneapolis in population. And so those are, and Oslo, when they started their Vision Zero effort in the late 90s, they had way more traffic crash deaths than we do today. So rapid progress can be made, and that's what we want to achieve with Vision Zero. So a couple other key points I think that are important for folks to know when we talk about traffic crashes is that we see that crashes and severe injuries and deaths are more concentrated in low-income communities and communities of color. And this inequity is not okay, and we're working to address it with Vision Zero. We also see that people who walk and bike are overrepresented in severe and fatal crashes. This is also unacceptable. People should be safe no matter how they choose to get around. I know with Move Minneapolis's work to try to support more walking, biking, and transit, that's being safe is a core part of that as well. And we know that people won't, if this stays true, if you say, hey, you're more than 4 or 5 times higher risk for severe injury or death if you try to bike to work, that makes it harder for all of us to achieve that goal of supporting people biking to work, and the health and community benefits that come from that. So as one example. So we're working to address this as well. But Vision Zero is about getting to zero for all the ways that people get around. So we may have more challenges for people walking and biking here, but we have a lot of work to do for people driving and in cars as well. So we had done a lot of engagement around our Vision Zero effort over really the last year and a half to inform our Vision Zero action plan, which I'll talk about in just a second here, which was adopted in December. One of the things we asked is, just general questions about how safe people feel and how important it is. And honestly, this 85% of people felt that it was very important to improve traffic safety. And this was true across the different audiences that we reach out to in different ways. So some people came to us, sometimes we went to people out on the street or in meetings. That was higher than we expected to see, frankly. And I think shows there was a lot of interest in how do we make our streets safe for everyone. And we also see that people feel somewhat safe, but most people feel there's a way we can improve safety for sure on our streets. We asked a lot of people, what's your best idea for making our streets safer? And you can kind of see sort of the themes emerge here that we saw across engagement, is that by and large, people wanted us to prioritize making street safety and changes out physically on the street. And you can see within that a bunch of different things here. You see traffic, bike, crosswalks, speed, light, and various other things that it comes together. And then we also saw a lot of interest around enforcement. And I'll talk about it a little bit more. You'll see kind of the strategies we've put forward there, because we both saw a lot of people who wanted a lot more traffic enforcement and felt like there's not enough happening in the city or very little happening in the city. And then others who were concerned about that from an equity perspective. And so we tried to balance that feedback within our plan. And then you can also see here some lower interest in education related items, which are a component of our work as well. So for Vision Zero, overall, we're saying safety and human life first. People should not die moving around our city, just fundamental. Equity is a big part of this. We have to work on the disparities that I spoke of earlier, and also make sure that we're not having unintended, inequitable outcomes as we do this work. We also want to be very data driven. So that's part of why I've gone through this data, and I'll talk a little more, is we want this to be grounded in where are the biggest problems, where are the things that we can make the most progress the fastest so we can save lives. And then accountability. So we're reporting on this regularly. We'll be tracking a lot of this. Fundamentally, we know we have to build community trust with the work that we're doing, or we're not going to be successful. It takes a partnership with government making changes based on data and community feedback. So part of that data is that community feedback. And then also community members feeling a lot of trust and engagement on that. And so collectively, we can make the progress. So our Vision Zero action plan I mentioned includes, I'm not going to get into a lot of the details today because I'm going to stay focused on the speed section, but I am going to pull out a few highlights from it. Note within this that there's components of this plan that focus on our street environment. So speed limits kind of falls in there. Then there's components that relate to safe human choices, which are, all these things are related. And I'll talk a little bit about some key points there. And then safe vehicles is really looking at the city's role. I'm not going to talk about it much today because this is more of a state and federal function, but the city does have some role, say, around scooters or bike share or other things, and future of autonomous vehicles and things like that. And then safety data is really allowing us to make sure we're staying data driven in a smart way. So let's get to speeds. So overall, we recognize that supporting safe speeds is an essential component of reaching zero. So zero traffic deaths and severe injuries cannot happen if we are not supporting safe speeds. As Becky mentioned in the introduction, higher speeds make crashes more likely. They make crashes more likely to be severe, and I'll show some stats on that in just a second. And so when we look at this, we aren't just talking, speed limits are just one of the aspects of that. It's an essential, critical first step, we feel, in this work, but alone, it's not gonna get us to our outcome of safe speeds. And so within this, we also are having those speed limits be supported by street design. We are looking at education and communications. How do we get out the word? How do we build the culture or that values, as you see in this graphic, that values safety more and over speed as we get around our city and access things. And then I'll talk a little bit about automated speed enforcement as one of the components. So here's the basic stats. Sorry, my head might be in the way here a little bit on the risk at different speed levels. This graphic is specific to pedestrians. So if you're hit as a pedestrian at 20 versus 40 miles an hour, you can see it's more than 5 times worse impact for you, a higher likelihood that you'll be killed or severely injured in that collision. And the same sort of principle holds true for all modes, but it's most acute for people walking, which is especially a big deal downtown. This graphic just shows you are at a little slower speed, you have more time to react and stop. So stopping distance goes up significantly, a little bit more than just linearly through the speeds that we're talking about, both reaction time and the physical ability of your car to stop. And so when we get to these higher speeds, we're talking about it can take more than half a city block for you to stop if something happens that you're not predicting. And that's a big deal. So what speed limit changes have we made? I will show some maps here in a second, and for downtown in particular, I'll talk about some of that. But overall, we are using a tiered approach where when fully implemented, the speed limit will be 20 miles per hour on our local residential streets. That'll include a few streets downtown, which I'll note in a minute. But most downtown streets are going to fall in the second category, which is 25 miles an hour for city-owned collector and arterial streets. So these are busier streets that are city-owned. I will note that speed limits will continue to be 30 or higher for busier county and MnDOT roads because the city does not have jurisdiction over those streets. And currently that jurisdiction lies with MnDOT. Now there are conversations about those. We recognize within our Vision Zero action plan that we need to have conversations with those agencies around speed limits on their streets. So when I show the map here, you'll start to see how doesn't make a lot of, it's not as logical for people if there's some bifurcation between jurisdiction. But B, in our analysis, we know that we need to support slower speeds on those roads as well to get to Vision Zero. That's fundamentally a reality for all of our agencies. And then we do have a couple short stretches, actually including two kind of leading out of downtown where we have a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit on a city-owned street. What I will note is that fundamentally the way this will be implemented, those busier streets that don't have 20-mile-an-hour limits will be clearly signed so you know what the speed limit is. So if we look to downtown, here's sort of, it's a little bit challenging to read here, but I'm just going to point out a couple things for a speed limit map for downtown. Let's see, I think you all can see my cursor now. So Nicollet Mall continues to be 10, sort of a unique thing in the city as a shared transit mall. You can see that we got these gray lines here are more in the edges of downtown, Elliott Park, Loring Park, some North Loop, some of these short streets especially. Those are going to be 20 mile-an-hour speed limits. And then the vast majority of streets downtown are the purple is 25. And then you can see the county streets, and then one MnDOT street here are 30, staying at 30. The 35s here, these are leading to kind of the freeway ramps in and out of downtown. Just a note on that. So I wanted to just share a few examples of what we hope is gonna happen and be the results of this. As I said, it's not gonna be this feeling of change alone that gets us to where we need to be, but we've seen in other cities who have done this recently some significant success. So Seattle has almost the exact same system for speed limits that we are using in Minneapolis. And on their 20-mile-an-hour streets, which is this graph on the left here, they've seen a 21% reduction in total crashes. There's always a little bit of ebb and flow since they went to 20 miles an hour. They went from 25 to 20. We're going from 30 to 20 on those streets. And then on the right here, I'm maybe blocking with my head a little bit, but they initially lowered from 30 to 25 on just some of their collector and arterial streets. Within that, they found so much success, 44% reduction in all crashes. In their downtown area, they had, I think, a 21% reduction in severe and fatal crashes, that they've expanded their collector and arterial program citywide. And they've sort of similar to what we have done. And so other cities like Boston and New York and Portland and Charlotte, Albuquerque, those are some of the cities that have lowered speed limits in recent years. Minneapolis did this concurrently with St. Paul, so that the system that I went through is the same in St. Paul as well. But both cities were not the first in Minnesota. A town of Nevis, which is much smaller than us, but very important, was the first city to lower speed limits in Minnesota. So part of our context for our change also was that Minnesota, all of our neighboring states have a default urban speed limit of 25 miles per hour, and Minnesota is actually higher there. As this map shows, the beige is 30, and blue is 25. And a majority of states, not most, but a majority have 25-mile-an-hour default limits for urban areas as well. So if you look citywide, based on our speed limit change, yellow is 30-mile-an-hour streets. So before, most streets in Minneapolis were 30 with the parkways and the busier streets, or the highway system, the higher speed limits. And then afterwards, you can see about 70% of our streets are going to have a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. So a very significant change across the city. And then about 20% of our streets will have 25-mile-an-hour speed limits. So I alluded a little bit already to our signage plans. So the busier streets, or the streets that do not have a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, are going to be signed individually, kind of as at busy crossing points. We are going to have gateway signs at key entry points to the city, including off of freeways, saying that unless you see a sign, the speed limit will be 20 miles an hour citywide in Minneapolis. And this, we're doing it this way, because it aligns most closely with our current system, which is, we have a statutory 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, and people are expected to know that. We don't sign very many streets. We're actually adding a lot of signs with this effort. We're adding about 1,000 new speed limit signs, in addition to changing out about 600 speed limit signs. But signing all of our local residential streets would add a lot of effort and cost. And we want to try this system, which has worked well in some other cities, before we would look to that. We are aligning our signage efforts with St. Paul, including our timing. I'll give you a status update here in a second, citywide, of where we're at in signage, but we expect to be totally finished with all the gateway signs and the new speed limits in place by this fall. So you can find more details on speed limits on the visionzerompls.com website. We'll actually be adding a lot more detail this week, or additional detail this week as well, with answering some of the frequently asked questions we've been getting. Things like, can I get a speed limit sign on my street? The answer is no, but we will be evaluating, and maybe in the future, we'll see. We'll also be having yard signs available for folks. We know, especially this is probably mostly outside of downtown, that there'll be interest in people getting out the word about the lower speed limits on those local residential streets. And so the yard signs will look like this 20 is plenty sign on the left. We're working on our distribution plan given COVID-19 for those signs. And then on the right, we also on our website have a regularly updated, you can both see what is the speed limit going to be on every individual street in the city, but you can also see this picture here is where we are at in installing speed limit signs at this moment in time. And so the blue here are signs we've already installed on the 25-mile-an-hour system, which is where we're starting. The purple are ones that are yet to be installed. You can see we're still working through South Minneapolis right now. Then the last part we're going to be installing for the change out to 25-mile-an-hour speed limits on the busier streets is downtown. And so we will be getting there in the next few weeks. So speed limits downtown will be changing soon. We'll work with Move Minneapolis and others to just make sure that that's clear for folks. Right now in downtown, there are not a lot of speed limit signs. And we will be adding a bunch to downtown just so it's clear what the speed limit is there, and differentiating the county and MnDOT roads where appropriate, so people have a good sense. One of the important things that is happening both downtown and citywide is that we're adjusting our signal timing as well to support the new speed limits. So previously, you might, as you drive along, if you're going 30 miles an hour, you might get a good rhythm on the lights. We'll be slowing that down just a little bit so that you go 25 miles an hour and you're going to get that good flow with the lights. The tweak downtown will be a little bit more less apparent than some of the other parts of the city related to that, just given the kind of the flow that we had set previously. So that's some of the basics on speed limits. A few other context points kind of citywide. So here is a map, and then I'm going to include at the end here some specific data and stats for downtown and safety. So if we look citywide, one of the things some of the other strategies we're looking to do are making safety improvements proactively on our high injury streets. So the purple streets here, this is a map that shows location of severe and fatal pedestrian, bicycle, or vehicle crashes over a 10-year period citywide. The purple lines are what we've had to determine based on that and crash analysis. What are our high injury streets? So these streets overall are 9% of our streets, but they have 70% of our severe and fatal crashes over 10 years. And so we're working to address those streets first, so we can make the most progress on saving lives. These streets are across jurisdiction, and we're partnering with we are working to partner with our county and MnDOT colleagues on their streets on this network as well. So some of the things we'll be looking to do include what we call a 4 to 3 lane safety conversion. So you can see here, this is just a striping change, so a change in paint, very low cost. That on the left here, it's sort of worn out, but there were 2 lanes in each direction. This 2 lanes in each direction is one of the a street configuration we see a lot of safety problems with citywide. And because if you think about driving on a street like that, if you need to turn left, there isn't space for you to do that. And so it leads to challenges. And moving to something like on the right, where we have provided dedicated left turn lane, we've seen citywide a 36% reduction in injury crashes after making a change like this from 15 projects that the county or city has implemented in the last 10 or so years. So very good return on investment for us, improving safety quickly. We're also looking, because we're talking about trying to make safety improvements in the next 3 years on more than 80 miles of streets in the city. We can't do all of that we're not going to be reconstructing all those streets. We will be reconstructing some of those, but we can't proactively get out there with curbs on all those streets. So we're looking to use, in addition to paint, we're looking to use these flexible treatments called bollards or flexible delineators that get a lot of the benefit that we're hoping for at much lower upfront cost. And then we'll be able to upgrade these over time as we do future work. But the goal here is to really transform the safety on these 80 miles of streets very quickly. We'll also be looking at other treatments that relate to like turning movements, having more left turn phases, dedicated left turn phases, like on the bottom one here. Having this top left is what we call a leading pedestrian interval, which is, you can see you get the walk sign before the light turns green for cars, just to give people walking a chance to get out in front. And other things to really ease and turning movements at intersections, because for all ways that people get around, it's turning movements at intersections that are the biggest challenge for us in the city. So slowing that and making it easier and more predictable for everyone. So that's another highlight for us on the street side. As we move into other parts of our Vision Zero work, I want to acknowledge that we are working to address the 5 most unsafe behaviors we see on Minneapolis streets. So you can see this graphic shows them: red light running, driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, speeding, unsafe turning at intersections. So it's mostly failing to yield, especially it happens with to pedestrians or bicyclists at intersections, and then distracted driving. And so with these, we're going to be focusing our education, enforcement, and related efforts on these things because they're the most problematic for us, and we can make the most difference for safety. We're also looking at automated traffic enforcement. So some of you may recall that the city did a red light camera program briefly in 2005 that the Minnesota Supreme Court eventually deemed that we did not have the authority to do under Minnesota law. I think sometimes people are confused and think that the Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional to do it. That isn't what the Supreme Court said. In fact, no state has found it unconstitutional to do automated traffic enforcement, but we do need state legislation to do automated traffic enforcement in a way that would make sense and set up well. So we are looking with our Vision Zero effort to kind of rekindle some conversations around that. We'll be analyzing both how do we do this in the best way for Minneapolis to inform potential partnership statewide to getting legislative authority to have a system of automated enforcement that is done fairly and equitably and understandably, and that we know will be effective at saving lives, which is the goal of this. And so a couple notes on automated enforcement is it is proven to be very effective at saving lives. And we know, and this is in many different studies in many different states and contexts, including studies that looked at the red light program in Minneapolis. And one study said that it was expected that the taking out of the red light cameras in Minneapolis led to a 19% increase in fatal crashes across every intersection in Minneapolis. So just as an example. So a couple notes for downtown in particular, and then we'll get to some answering your questions. So I'm maybe blocking this map a little bit. Again, I apologize, but top right here is a zoomed in version of where are severe and fatal crashes in downtown. And what really stands out, I know there aren't labels on this map, so I'll just point out a few things. So Hennepin Avenue, especially for pedestrians, is our biggest challenge downtown. And this is not surprising because it's one of the few two-way streets in downtown, and in lots of parts we're not able to manage the turning movements very well. And so this is something that I'm definitely thinking about, and we are reconstructing Hennepin coming up. We'll be making a lot of safety improvements as part of that, and I think we're still thinking about how do we augment that, recognizing the challenges that we see on Hennepin Avenue downtown. I will also note that based on the volume of people moving around downtown, that generally it's doing a little better safety-wise than a lot of our nearby neighborhoods. And there are probably a lot of factors for that. But we still do see some challenges. You see other concentrations around First Avenue North, especially as you can imagine on weekends there. We also see a cluster around HCMC, kind of downtown east area, and that's one that's really popped up, especially in the last couple of years. And so we are definitely mindful of other changes we need to make there. Our high injury streets downtown kind of ebb and flow, but Hennepin, First Avenue North, Third Avenue, the two-way streets definitely stand out, and something that we're thinking about in addition to other changes. If you look at this, we see downtown that we have an average of 17 people, so one every 21 days, who's killed or severely injured in a crash in downtown. And those folks are 46% are in a car, 40% are walking, and 14% are biking. So it's kind of all modes as well. So again, for folks who maybe joined a little later, just a final shout out and reminder that we are accepting feedback on our related transportation action plan, which includes some of the strategies we talked about here for Vision Zero. And please get your comments in, share your thoughts, or join us this Thursday for an online open house. And with that, I'm going to transition to questions. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ethan. This was a really fabulous presentation, and we have lots of questions. So I'm gonna get right into it. We will finish at the top of the hour, so I just want to commit to that. So let's start. We've had a couple about congestion, and I want to start there. I think there's some interesting points to this. We have a question. From a technical traffic management perspective, will slower speed limits help, hinder, or be a neutral factor in overall traffic congestion? And I recognize that you may not have the answer to this, but I find that interesting to think about, and I'd be curious if you happen to know.
Yes, I'm not an engineer, traffic engineer, but our traffic engineers are the ones who led our effort around speed limits and our speed limit change. As part of that, I feel very confident, because I've heard them talk about it, that they feel that this will sort of have a neutral impact on traffic congestion. In the way that traffic moves around in a busy environment, a lot of times when we see traffic downtown, for example, people aren't reaching the speed limit anyway. And so during those busy parts of the day, we know that the speed limit change is, isn't really at play anyway. And then otherwise, speed does have a complex, my understanding is it's complex impact on throughput on a highway environment. And there are kind of trade-offs between, how far you have to stay behind somebody to be safe, and then and how many cars you can move through there. I can't say I know the details of that, but in an urban environment, with lots of traffic signals and intersections like we do in Minneapolis, our engineers definitely feel that this will not have any noticeable impact on congestion, one way or the other. Great.
And then kind of looking at the flip side, during this pandemic, we've seen the tragic impact to safety that kind of these free-flowing, uncongested streets and highways is having, that injuries and crashes are up. And, you know, kind of to flip that, can you talk a little more on the role of urban congestion on safety? You know, for example, we have a question, is a 4-to-3 conversion possible on Hennepin Avenue downtown? Could we kind of purposely congest city streets by reducing car and truck travel lanes and then have better safety outcomes for everyone?
Well, so there are multiple facets to that. Let me talk about COVID-19 first of all. So we do see that statewide, while driving is down significantly, although I think it's come back to closer to normal levels in the last week or so. During that time of significantly less traffic, we did see statewide a 50% reduction in total crashes, but also nearly a 50% increase in fatal crashes statewide. Well, I would note in Minneapolis, we didn't quite have that same as dramatic an increase in fatal crashes. It's sort of, you can imagine it being in the city. It's a small enough sample size that it's a bit within sort of what we might expect to be possible, right, on a normal time. And statewide, we were seeing the biggest challenges around speed and aggressive driving, especially on more rural conditions where people were just taking bigger or have been taking bigger risks. And so that's definitely a concern. We are hearing increased concerns about really high speeding citywide, and drag racing and other things in recent weeks. That's definitely something that we're concerned about. We recognize that over time, we have to build that safety culture collectively around that, but also that we have to redesign our streets and have systems in place that like automated enforcement that make it much harder for people to do that because of the danger it poses to everyone, as well as the quality of life benefits that it or detriments it puts on folks. Right. And so that's for the COVID question. In terms of what I would say as it relates to kind of congestion and would we want to intentionally congest streets? That's definitely not an equation that we're thinking about. For us, we have we have a lot of different city goals that relate to safety is a huge one here that as we talked about, but also in ensuring sustainability, access, and strong economy. All those things play a key role. We know that people need to be able to move around efficiently and effectively in all modes and safely. And so what we're looking at for safety improvements is we know we can both have a very efficient system that gets people where they need to go, but also one that's much safer. And so that's really our goal. And so Hennepin Avenue downtown is certainly a very complex roadway, and there's been a lot of engagement around that design and a lot of analysis that's gone into the planned reconstruction there already. So
great, thanks. We have lots of different questions, so I'm gonna let's see. I think we have a couple about kind of how are you getting the word out to folks, and I think this is part of it. Our collaboration with the city's collaboration with Move Minneapolis is part of the outreach effort. But there are a couple. What other things are you doing in terms of letting people know about the new speed limits, Ethan? Yeah,
so frankly, the COVID-19 has put a little bit of a wrinkle in our plans to get out the word. I think we actually had the last sort of normal press events before the COVID emergency was declared and everything sort of changed. And so I would say that we've delayed a lot of our getting out the word about this, but we're going to be pushing out much more in the coming weeks here to get out the word. We ultimately are working with some different partners, organizations to get out the word in some specific communities. As I mentioned, we're going to have the yard signs, which is going to be a big part of our communications effort. We're going to have 3,000 yard signs available for community members because we know that community members care about this and they want to help get out the word. And that'll make a big impact for us. Also in building the collective community culture around recognizing that we value that safety, we value that livability and community, and we collectively want to work on it together. And so that's going to be a big component. We'll also be, doing a lot of the traditional things, paid social media ads, bus ads, a variety of different strategies to make sure we get out the word. And then ultimately we'll come back and hopefully get some more media attention to it, since we caught it at not the ideal moment from that perspective. So. Right.
Well, we've also got a couple of questions focused on this interagency collaboration piece, looking at, the City of Minneapolis only has jurisdiction over so many roads, but we have county and state roads within the city boundaries. Can you talk a little bit about how amenable MnDOT and the county are in reducing speed limits, and kind of we have a quote here from MnDOT's website. Let's see here. In many cases, posting a lower speed limit creates a greater speed variance between the slowest and fastest moving vehicles. This can, according to them, can contribute to crashes and make the roadway less safe. So, I guess can you speak a little bit more to what they're doing or how you're working with them, knowing that we have a lot of high injury streets that are actually run by the county or county roads?
Yeah, definitely. So thanks for the question. So traditionally, I'll try to get just a little bit technical for folks. Traditionally, engineers have set speed limits based on idea that you want to set the speed limit to reflect how drivers use the roadway. And you want most drivers to be going at or below the speed limit. In fact, 85% of drivers has been the target. In recent years, there's been increasing national relook at that. And a lot of the national kind of guidance and standards is in the process of changing, mostly for urban conditions. So that rule works pretty well. And that statement from MnDOT's website definitely has more variance in fact for rural roadways or interstates or highway conditions. But that data doesn't fit for urban conditions. And in fact, when Boston lowered their speed limit from 30 to 25 citywide, they actually saw drivers more likely to be clumped closer to the same speed. And they were reducing sort of the outliers at higher speeds, which both has a big safety benefits from multiple perspectives, including the one that MnDOT refers to in that quote of just you don't want people to be driving at vastly different speeds. But that's very much a highway oriented view. And so MnDOT, to their credit, is thinking about this. They have a study right now looking at speed limits statewide. The City of Minneapolis and the City of St. Paul are both part of that, as are a number of other stakeholders, and really looking at that. So we're very hopeful on that. The county right now doesn't have authority on speed limits on county roads. So this is largely a MnDOT thing, or potentially, if the legislature wanted to give counties the same authority they gave cities last year, maybe that would change the equation as well. But we are very happy to have those dialogues continuing, and I appreciate that MnDOT's looking at this carefully, and the national guidance is changing too. So I'm very hopeful that we can come to agreement on lower speed limits on many of those roads too in the coming years.
Great. I have a real easy one for you next.
I love easy ones.
Hopefully it's easy. How can somebody request 20 is plenty yard sign?
Okay, that's a hard one, actually.
Oh no!
No, because we will be pushing out details on how to do that soon. Like I said, we are trying to sort out our distribution plan for the yard signs given COVID-19, and making sure we're doing that in a safe and responsible way for everyone. So I actually have a call on that tomorrow, and so we should have that figured out in the next week or so. It will definitely be after the stay-at-home order is lifted. We're not going to be distributing any of those signs while the stay-at-home order is in place.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ethan. We can help get the word out to participants on whatever that plan is. All right, so we've got a number of questions about kind of design, and I recognize that there's some push-pull between street design and traffic enforcement, and they kind of go that both have a role to play. And so we've got a number of questions on both, and I'm just going to read a couple together. Let's take the street design elements first. So we've got a question, will any speed bumps be added? Let's see, we've got some comments from folks, a shout out in support of refuge medians, that they feel so much safer to cross one lane of traffic at a time. Let's see, I thought I saw one more here. Looking at bike ped crosswalks with a sign and flashing lights, that could be helpful. And then there was one more. Oh yes, will those center lane adjustments for turning have any impact on curb bump out plans at corners? So you've got to, this is a little bit of a mishmash question about speed bumps. Those, sure. I think it was the 2 lanes to having 2 lanes in a turning lane. So kind of tightening up the lane width. Does that impact curb bump out plans? You might not have these answers, but
yes.
Anyway, any thoughts on the street design? I know you've got a lot of short-term plans in the next 3 years, and I appreciate you sharing that moving forward with kind of more, I don't know if they're easy to implement, but certainly less costly measures that can be done more quickly than permanent street reconstruction plans.
Yeah, definitely. Good question. So first of all, we are updating our traffic calming procedures and guidance citywide. Actually, it's part of the Transportation Action Plan effort, or kind of related to that. And that's to reflect both the feedback that we get from community members requesting traffic calming, and then also our new speed limits. And so we anticipate having that in place by the end of this year. And then we will have a new process in place for how people can either request and how we'll be prioritizing traffic calming improvements. As part of that, we are looking at what's the role of speed humps or speed bumps, as well as other traffic calming elements in that in different contexts. So on what's appropriate for, say, a local residential street that has 500 cars a day, and people are just accessing the last block to their house mostly. That's different than what you're going to see for a downtown street like Hennepin Avenue. And so we'll have all that reflected and clear. And we want a clear, fairer, and more transparent process for everyone in the community to understand how we make those decisions. Because we get literally thousands of requests for that every year. We have to say no to most of them. But having people understand that, how we're making those decisions is really our goal, but also how do we say yes to more of them? I think that's also what we're looking at. In terms of some of the other elements, we are working this year to get out some what we call quick build safety improvements. So those flexible plastic posts or paint changes on about 20 different locations this year. And this is really our hope is to really ramp this up for next year, the year after. And that will include sort of as appropriate based on the intersection and what's going on there, different designs. So it could include refuge islands, as was noted. I'm glad those are serving folks well. We'll definitely have more of those. It will include bump outs as appropriate as well. There is, most of the time you're not going to do both a bump out and a center median. You sort of make a choice between those two based on the circumstances and intersection. Both are beneficial, and we kind of have to weigh what's happening at that particular intersection to determine which is more appropriate. for all these
That makes
things,
sense.
we'll be doing engagement and getting out the word and helping people also know, like, why are we doing these and how do you use them? Because we hear those concerns like, what's this change that just popped out of nowhere? And what is it for? So we're going to be trying to different ways to communicate that out as well, including right on the street. So you'll see that some in downtown this year too, but also in surrounding neighborhoods. So more to come. We have actually some information. We've got a Vision Zero page on our website in our capital projects where we'll have more information of that up actually this week. So
very cool. Keep us updated.
Yeah.
So let's talk about downtown for a second. We've got a couple questions, and I'm gonna that seem sort of similar. You know, we have a lot of people walking downtown. You know, going in a normal time. You know, especially during the summer. Who it's nice to be outside in our Minnesota summers, and great to go to the farmers market and to walk around downtown and walk to the river. And so foot traffic is I would say quite high in downtown as compared, for commercial areas compared with some of our residential neighborhoods. Why are speed limits set at 25 in downtown instead of lowering them even further? How did that decision get made? And we have 2 minutes left, so
okay.
You'd be like the radio correspondent. Can you answer
Yeah.
in 30 seconds?
So we did rely on kind of other cities' examples and national guidance and kind of determining an appropriate system. I will say we really analyzed two options. One was kind of a universal 25-mile-an-hour speed limit citywide on all streets. And the other one was the tiered system that we put in place. We made the determination that we felt that the tiered system was better for us, given the high percentage of our streets that could be 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, and have that reflect pretty closely what people's expectations and use are for those streets. And 30 miles an hour, even 20 miles an hour, or 25 miles an hour on those streets just doesn't seem to fit with what the data we see on what's happening on those streets. Big part of what we were looking at is a system for speed limits that is understandable and makes sense for folks. So if we set speed limits and the street design doesn't at all support that, it's not going to be effective. And so we really, when we looked and analyzed our data in Minneapolis, we really saw that speeds were about 5 miles an hour or lower on those local residential streets than they were on our collector and arterial streets. And so we're asking everybody to slow down a bit from what speeds have been traditionally on both sets of streets. But we think it's at a level that is realistic and is understandable for folks. And we want it to be effective. And having it be realistic is part of that, is an important part of that equation.
Great.
I will say that we've gotten other questions on that, and we're going to continue to evaluate and we'll keep an eye on things as we make this change, and in the future we'll see where things go. Perfect.
Well, I want to recognize that we have so many questions that we didn't get to. We will record them and see what we can do to make sure they get answered later as best we are able. But I would like to wrap this up and just say a sincere thank you to you, Ethan, for your collaboration on this. It's really great to learn more, and I know we have an appreciative audience out there. Many thanks to Dan Collison, New Loop Partners, Easttown Business Association for being part of this webinar outreach also. So with that, I will say thank you, and we'll wrap it up and look for it on our website, our new website, www.moveminneapolis.org. So thank you again, Ethan. Take care, all.
Thank you all.